Story 4.
Driving my grandma home from Nebraska, everything seemed routine. We were on Highway 45, heading south, just a smooth, straight road with nothing but forest around us. Then, without warning, we found ourselves in a tiny, deserted town. There had been no turnoff, no side roads, just the single lane stretching ahead, leading us right into this strange place. The town was eerie and lifeless, like something stuck in time. It looked like a blend of decades, a mix of 1950s simplicity with strange, mismatched 1980s updates. There weren't many cars around, and those we saw seemed too old and out of place, as if they'd been parked there for decades. In the distance stood a massive gray and black building, part church, part town hall, with an almost ominous presence. As soon as we crossed into the town, my grandma became visibly anxious, glancing around like she knew something was off. I could feel it too. This place felt like a drawing of a town, almost artificial, like what someone would sketch without ever visiting a real small town. We didn't see a single soul that night. In hindsight, that was probably a blessing. I wasn't sure I wanted to meet anyone from there. The buildings seemed wrong. Odd windows placed between floors where no one could look out, and some stores without doors or even signs. Streets led nowhere, and the main road continued straight, with no exits or side streets. As we rolled along, the thick trees surrounding us seemed to press closer, their branches scraping against the car, like this place didn't want us to leave. The air was thick with silence, the kind that settles in places untouched by time or visitors. My grandma's face was pale, and she whispered that we had to leave immediately. Her fear was contagious, and for a moment, my curiosity almost got the better of me. If she hadn't been there, I might have parked and wandered around, tempted to explore this hidden, bizarre place. But something deep down told me this was somewhere we weren't meant to be. I made a tight U-turn, hoping the road would lead us out. As we drove back, the dense forest swallowed the town behind us, and slowly, the familiar stretch of Highway 45 reappeared. I looked in the rearview mirror, expecting to see that strange town shrinking into the distance, but it had vanished as quickly as it had appeared. We were alone on the road again, heading north, completely off course. Trying to find our way back, I turned around once more, searching for any sign of the town. But when we reached the spot where it should have been, there was nothing. Just an unbroken line of trees and the empty highway stretching on. There was no trace of the strange little town, no mark on any map, and no explanation for what we'd seen. Even now, I'm left wondering what would have happened if I had stayed, if I'd ignored my grandma's advice and explored that place. Sometimes I can almost convince myself it was all in my head, a trick of the night. But I know better. There are places out there, hidden in plain sight, that aren't meant for us to find. So next time you're on a dark, empty road, think twice before you stop. You never know if what you're seeing is real or if it's just waiting to disappear again.
Story 3.
In October 2013, I was just 21, working a warehouse job from 3 p.m. until around 11 p.m. on weekdays. After every shift, as we all headed out from the parking lot, I noticed a subtle pattern. Most of my co-workers would turn right, heading in one direction, but there were just a few of us, maybe 2 or 3, who always turned left. It was a small detail, but it stuck with me. That night, the other 2 co-workers who usually turned left with me had already gone, so I was alone when I turned left from the lot. A few minutes later, as I stopped at a red light, I saw an SUV pull up behind me. It struck me as odd because there was an empty lane beside us, yet the driver had chosen to line up right behind me. I brushed it off, figuring it was just a coincidence. When the light turned green, I started driving at a steady 70 miles per hour, and the SUV followed close behind. I planned to make a quick stop at my parents' house since it was on the way, but I couldn't help noticing that the SUV kept the same distance behind me, staying right in my lane. Annoyed, I switched to the right lane and slowed to 65 to let it pass, but it didn't. It matched my speed, staying right behind me. At that point, it started to feel off. I decided against visiting my parents and aimed to go straight home. As I merged onto the freeway, I picked up speed, moving into the fast lane, pushing 85 to 90 miles per hour. Yet, every lane change I made, the SUV mirrored. Every time I sped up or slowed down, it did the same. By the time I took the exit toward my neighborhood, I felt uneasy and didn't want to head directly to my apartment. Instead, I drove past it, heading for a nearby gas station. I parked by a pump as if I were going to refuel, and sure enough, the SUV pulled up right behind me. When I glanced in the mirror, I saw two men inside wearing ski masks. Just then, two homeless men approached my car, asking if I had any spare change. I believe they saved me that night, because as soon as they came over, the SUV slowly backed away and drove off. Watching in my mirror, I saw the SUV moving down the street, but it didn't completely leave the area. I waited a while, watching them disappear down the road, but just as I pulled out of the station, I noticed them making a U-turn and coming back toward me. This time, though, I managed to lose them for good. I haven't seen that SUV since, but I think back often to that night. Those homeless men may have saved me from something terrible, and I'll always be grateful for them stepping in when they did.
Story 2.
This happened during my first year of high school. Winter had just passed, so the air was still cold at night. My friend, let's call her Veronica, messaged me, asking what I was up to. To give some context, I was at my cousin's house, about 8 blocks from her place, with McDonald's roughly half a mile from both of us. Across the McDonald's, there was a Target and a few other fast food spots, with a Burger King a bit further away. It's hard to remember whose brilliant idea it was to sneak out at 11 p.m. just for some late-night food, but we decided to go for it. Sneaking out wasn't too hard, even though it was my first time. Veronica, though, was practically a pro. I went out in pajamas, a big football jersey and shorts, not the best choice for a late-night adventure, especially in a not-so-safe area. We met halfway and started walking to McDonald's, laughing about boy drama and complaining about a math teacher we both disliked. The streets were quiet, but not completely empty, and I was on edge, hoping my mom wouldn't spot me if she drove by. We decided to cut through Target's big parking lot to reach McDonald's. The lot is a bit uphill if you're coming from the west, but since we were coming from the south, it was an easy walk. As we crossed from Target to McDonald's, we noticed a guy. He was around 5 feet 5 inches, wearing a blue hoodie and shorts. Veronica was about 5 feet 2 inches, and I was around 5 feet 4 inches at the time. I didn't pay much attention to him since we were busy laughing and chatting, but I remembered him later. I kept talking, but Veronica started glancing over her shoulder, something she always does, regardless of the time of day. Then she slipped her arm around mine and whispered that the guy was following us. I turned to look, but tried to keep it subtle. At first, I thought she might be joking, but when I saw her face, I knew she was serious. She picked up the pace, but I squeezed her arm and reminded her not to act like we'd noticed him. Despite not being the most street smart, I wasn't entirely clueless. Growing up in a rough area, I'd learned to stay aware. I suggested we go into Target. When we crossed the street, I glanced back and saw the guy was crossing too. Veronica was definitely scared. But me? I was laughing, half from nerves, half from the irony. The first time I sneak out and we get followed, it felt surreal. In the Target parking lot, I FaceTimed my cousin to tell her what was happening, laughing nervously while Veronica freaked out beside me. We agreed to make a run for it across the lot and into the store. Once we were safely inside, we roamed around a bit in case he followed, but thankfully, he didn't. We eventually went to sit by the glass windows near the entrance, trying to decide what to do. Veronica spotted the guy walking past Target, heading in the same direction we'd come from. Behind Target, there's a park I usually cut through to get home, but this time I called my older brother for advice. He told me to contact my cousin and have her come to meet us at Target. I texted her, asking her to bring her boyfriend along. We were finally starting to feel safe when a different guy walked up to us. He looked to be about 5 feet 7 inches. He told us he'd seen us in the McDonald's drive-thru, noticed the guy following us, and wanted to make sure we were okay. We explained what happened and assured him that our family was on the way. We thanked him, feeling both reassured and a little shaken. Soon, my cousin showed up with her boyfriend and her dad in the car, so yeah, we got busted. But luckily, I didn't get in trouble since they were my cousins, and they were more concerned about what could have happened. Veronica came back to my cousin's house with me, where we went over the whole thing, even FaceTiming an older friend to fill him in. Having someone else confirm what we experienced made it feel even more real. I've been followed a few more times since then, and it's left me with serious anxiety. I definitely won't be walking alone at night anymore.
Story 1.
This happened back in 2014 when I was around 12 years old. It was summer break, and it was about 11 p.m. My mom came into the living room where I was relaxing and asked if I wanted to go with her to pay our water bill. I loved nighttime drives, so I immediately said yes. My mom, my sister, and I all got into the car and started driving toward the water tower. It was pitch dark outside, with only the moonlight faintly illuminating the road. We were chatting and having a good time on the drive until we reached the water tower. Now, I should mention that I have a pretty big fear of the dark, especially around where I live. It gets incredibly dark out here, and there aren't many streetlights. As soon as we arrived and I stepped out of the car, I heard some strange noises coming from the direction of the tower. I told my mom what I was hearing, but she just brushed it off, thinking I was being overly scared. My mom knows me well and probably thought I was just jumpy, given how much I hate the dark. Still, I got out of the car slowly and cautiously, made my way to the payment drop-off door. I quickly put the envelope in and hurried back to the car as fast as I could, all while my mom laughed at how spooked I was. She started the car, and we began driving back toward the highway, leaving the water tower behind. Then, suddenly, out of nowhere, this massive shadow swooped right in front of our truck. It was enormous, about 8 feet tall, with wings that stretched around 10 feet wide. It only appeared for a moment, but I could see its gray humanoid figure. The wingspan was huge, and its shape looked unsettlingly like a person, which made it even scarier. We watched in shock as it flew back up toward the tower before gliding down again, moving slowly and eerily close to the ground. It felt like everything around us froze. As soon as my mom and I processed what we'd seen, we started screaming. She floored the gas pedal, and I frantically glanced behind us to make sure it wasn't following. My sister hadn't seen the creature because she'd been on her phone, but hearing us scream freaked her out too. When we finally got home, we all rushed inside, and I couldn't sleep that night. I even shed a few tears, trying to process it all. Later, I found out there's a conservation area near where this happened, which could be where the creature lives. A year after that night, I watched an episode of Monsters and Mysteries in America. They featured stories about flying, human-like creatures, and the description matched what we'd seen almost perfectly. The people in the show described it as gray, humanoid, tall, with a massive wingspan, and how it flew in front of their car. I started crying as I watched it, the memory of that night flooding back. This encounter happened in the Ozarks, Missouri, which is about 4 hours from where I live. I understand that not many people might believe me, and that's fine. It doesn't change the fact that this creature is real and that we saw it that night.